D&D has one of the best combat systems in ttrpgs, but I still like to make those nat 20s a bit more interesting for my players. My name is Jay, or Paynii. Last week's video, I talked about critical hit rules for Dungeons & Dragons. Or rather, I didn't talk about them because I wanted to make this specific video for them. So let's jump right into the 4 systems that I like using or am exploring at the moment to figure out what really fits for me. Of course, if you have any improvement ideas or your own crit rules that you like to use in your games, please leave them down below in the comments so I can check them out and maybe we can work out a great system together. The first crit house rule that I want to introduce is one that is very common with most DMs, but maybe there's a first-time DM out there who's watching this video, and for those I really want to introduce this even though it's a very commonly known rule. Everyone has experienced these moments where a player got that nat 20 and got all excited about dealing big damage, so they get out their 2d8s to roll for their longsword, they roll them and 2 ones. It absolutely sucks. And in order to prevent that from happening, we have decided to use this particular rule. Simply said, we max out the first original die and then have them roll a crit die. What that means, for example, is that when they roll a normal critical hit, they roll 2d8s for longsword plus their strength, let's say +3, which would be 2d8 plus 3 for an average of 13 damage. With this new crit rule, however, they automatically have the maximum roll from the first roll, which would be an 8, plus 1d8 plus 3, which brings us to an average of 16, and you can roll no lower than 12, which already improves their minimum damage by a lot, which makes those critical hits feel impactful, and your players will be really grateful to actually have had a good roll on their critical hits, because that's what critical hits are supposed to do, right? I know this one's a very simple one that most people immediately think of when they hear crits, but I wanted to cover it. The next 3 rules are probably a lot more uncommon and you will most likely not have heard of them unless you are doing a lot of research. So let's jump right into my second one. Like I said in the beginning, I'm still testing some of these, and the second house rule is one that I'm currently testing with the campaign that I run in person. And I don't really know how I feel about it yet, so maybe someone in the comments can help me perfect it. This rule is a bit different as it doesn't adjust the damage that the critical roll does, but instead the frequency in which players can get critical rolls. It's kind of an equilibrium. In this case, instead of having criticals only on nat 20s, I decided any roll to hit that exceeds the creature's AC by 10 or more would also be a critical hit. Here's an example. The barbarian of my party rolled a 23 to hit on a bandit who has an AC of 12. Because 23 is at least 10 higher than 12, the hit turns into a critical hit. This works better or worse depending on the party that you're playing with. Some characters, and especially utilizing certain feats, have an easier time to hit that threshold of 10 above enemy's AC, while others have a really hard time when we look at things like Great Weapon Mastery, for example. That said, I need to point out that the Great Weapon Mastery I'm using in this example is the 2014 version. I believe they changed it in 2024, so you can ignore that if you're a 2024 player. The fun advantage of this system is that you can really kind of abuse it to make your characters feel like they've grown really powerful. Let's say you throw an encounter at your players that includes a lot of weak creatures that they have fought in the past to make them really realize, wow, we can just one-shot these gremlins and my character feels powerful. With this rule, a lot of those hits turn into critical hits simply because weaker creatures have lower AC a lot of the times. However, on the other hand, there are creatures in this game that are really high CR and are meant for endgame content, but they have really low AC, which they substituted for a high health pool. An example for that is the Ghost Dragon, which only has an AC of 10 but has an equivalently high health pool. This creature is constantly gonna get hit with critical hits from your higher level players because they need to somehow deal with a CR 17 creature, and by then they will easily hit 20 with every single roll. So it kind of imbalances the game towards the end when faced with creatures that didn't really stack AC. So when using creatures like this, it is very unsatisfying because it is just a crit fest. An AC of 10 on the Ghost Dragon is very easy to get 10 over. At that point, it makes the crits feel more annoying than exciting because it happens over and over again instead of being an occasional devastating hit. So I think this is a good system to use in low-level campaigns more than high-level campaigns. If you have any ideas how to improve the system, then please let me know down below. I'm very curious to hear what other people think about these. Which actually brings me to the third system that I want to present today, because it can get a little game breaky actually. Again, this one is not about the frequency of crits, but damage of the crits, like the first system that most other DMs use. Which is why this one was quite interesting to me, as I rather fix the damage output of critical hits than the frequency. Obviously, the first system really improved the damage of crits. This one does the same, but it kind of takes it to the extreme. So, you land a critical hit on a creature, and instead of rolling a second dice for all the dice you've rolled, roll another d100 that determines the damage of your critical hit. There's a bracket system. If you roll a 1 to 90, all the damage for that hit is doubled. You don't get the extra rolls, but it doubles, which on average probably evens out to the same damage as the first option that we covered. However, it gets a bit ridiculous if your D100 happens to land on anything between 91 and 99. Instead of doubling all the damage that you rolled on your damage dice prior, we triple all the damage, which is obviously a much higher average than you would get with the first option, but it's rarer. It's like a crit on top of a crit, which I find very interesting. This gets into game-breaking territory with the next bracket, a D100 that rolled 100. A super crit basically. After rolling the 5% chance of a crit on your d20, you then roll a 1% chance for this crit, and the original creator of this rule set, which I couldn't really find, decided it would be a good idea that a 100 immediately kills the target. Instant kill. No rolls, nothing, just instant kill. Which I find very interesting. It can make for an incredibly memorable moment in any game. You will never forget that time you faced off a minion of the BBEG and your barbarian or your fighter rolled that critical hit on their many attacks, and then they got the 1% and boom, instant kill. But you also kind of see the problem there. Fighters attack a lot, so they can really take advantage of critical hits. They have so in the past and they will with any other system. So it can get dangerous when you have someone rolling a lot of attacks against your BBEG. They hit that 1% on top of the 5%, and now your well-planned fight and climax of your story is down the drain. While memorable, it might actually be a bit disappointing. So again, it's a system that probably needs a lot of tweaking for it to actually end up being a good system, which is why I want to really use it in like a one-shot or something just to test it out and see how players feel about it. Again, like with all the other systems before, if you have any ideas or recommendations to improve it a little, let me know down below. The last system I find very, very interesting as a DM, but it might be a lot of work for DMs, which is probably why this one's not very well known either. The last one I brought, I haven't seen in any game at all so far, so it might be quite interesting to take a closer look at it. It's something I want to try in my games, or at least for some creatures. I think this one can be used very modularly, as it's easy to turn on and off depending on how you feel on that day. That is what makes it kind of unique in my opinion. You may have noticed that we've gone back and forth between increasing the damage of critical hits and increasing the frequency of critical hits, so you can probably guess which one this one covers. This one is about the frequency of crits again. But this one is far more adjustable than the second option about frequency that I presented earlier. Just like with all the other crit systems, nat 20s remain crit. But with this one, the DM decides a little bit of a weak point system with every creature. As an example, either DM decide that this bandit the party is running into has a weak point that is hit on a roll of 14, or any other roll between 1 and 19. You can of course have every bandit have the same weak point, like in the example 14, or every single bandit has a different one ranging from 1 to 19. This means this kind of system demands a lot of prep and paperwork from the DMs having to keep track of every single bandit's stats as well as their weak points. It just adds another number that we always have to remember besides their HP, which we might already have rolled, their AC, their initiative, and then also their weak point. Can be a lot for DM, which makes the modular system of it pretty great, that you can just pick and choose encounters where you want to use it and some way you don't. Again, this means more critical rolls rather than stronger critical rolls, as the damage remains rules as written. However, I think you can combine this one very well with the first house rule that we talked about, which increases the first die roll to the maximum roll, then adds a critical die roll. On top of that, I think it is a very fun surprise when a player rolls a die and gets a low roll and they're disappointed, and then the DM perks up and he's like, oh, actually that's a critical hit, as they discover that they just hit the weak spot on this particular creature. Be aware that this is a bit of a downside as well, as you are messing with creatures' AC by removing 1 point from them, adding it as a critical hit. This shouldn't be too big of a problem, but it can be, so just be aware of that. And with that, we got through all this a bit quicker than I thought, but I'm still glad I made it a separate video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in house rules that don't have to do with combat, then please click on the eye in the top corner and the video should show up right there, where I talked about other house rules that I like to use, and I will make a continuation of that in the future. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and all the good stuff. Ring that bell to support me, and also I want to thank everyone who's seen the previous videos and commented on my stuff and so on. It really means the world to me, and I hope to see you in my next video next week. Until then, I hope all of you have a fantastic time at your tables, and I'll see you then. Bye guys.